Hey everybody, and welcome to another one of my live streams where I interview talented IT professionals who got endorsed for the UK Global Talent Visa. If you're new here, welcome. I'm very glad to see you join. My name is Nadia. I'm a UK Global Talent Visa recipient and coach, which means that I got myself endorsed for the visa last year as a software engineer. And since then, I've been helping IT professionals get endorsed as well. And on my YouTube channel, which you can see on your screen now, and I do encourage you to subscribe if you're interested, I share information about this visa, tips, tricks, and also interviews with people who went through this journey and who can potentially help you get encouraged and get information to help you get endorsed as well. So with this intro out of the way, I'm very excited to bring on my guest today. One second. Welcome, Nipun.
Thank you, Nadia, for having me.
Yeah, how are you doing? How are you today?
Very good. I think London weather is rarely this beautiful, so I'm excited about today.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'm actually traveling, so I don't know what it's like. It's in London, so but if the weather is finally improved, I think that's big news. I think the spring has been quite, I don't know,
Brutal.
disappointing so far. Yeah, brutal. Yeah, I would say that as well. Yeah, so let's kick it off with some intros. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do for a living, what your professional background is.
Great, great. Yeah, so I'm Indian by birth, and I've been living outside of India for about 15, 20 years now. I, did my master's in science at Carnegie Mellon University in the US, and pretty much moved to the US after that point. Um, Started my career in consulting, learned a lot about business problems and how executives want to understand the solutions. And from there, I learned more about business development, partnerships, and got into the world of startups. Got a chance to work at Deutsche Bank as head of their security innovation team. And from there, I really wanted to contribute towards building a technology company. So I moved to London and actually made that dream real. So I was head of product for integrations team here at Devo, and then very recently became COO at Bearer.
Interesting. So so you have experience not only with businesses but also with immigration to already two countries. So I guess I wanted to start with the question of why the UK, right? So you were based in the States doing your studies. And why did you choose the UK as the next destination? This is a question that I think a lot of people would worry about, because if somebody has entrepreneurial tendencies or somebody wants to start their business, I think their choice would be between the UK and the US for a lot of people. So what motivated you to move to the UK?
Yeah, this is a great question because I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is arguably the best place for anybody in technology or startups to be in. What would motivate me to leave that and move anywhere else? I think
Yeah.
partly I think of myself as a very global citizen. So I want to travel a lot of the world. I want to go visit my family in India, in different places, and this challenge becomes more pronounced, especially when you're living at one of the edges of the world map, which is the west coast of the US. And so that part I wanted to really solve and go towards the center of the world map, and what better than UK to go. And the other motivation is in terms of startups, the quality of talent that exists here, the time zone that makes it very easy to work with. Not just Europe, but also on the east coast of the US. There's a lot of overlap. I wanted to get that access much more easily. So all that combined with the idea of venture ecosystem, which is really strong in UK, you made it really kind of a no-brainer for me to consider UK as an option to move to. Plus, more family reasons. My wife works in fintech, so that made a lot more sense for both of us to take this option.
Yeah, this makes sense. I think that the decision of going to the UK versus the US is quite complex. You have to evaluate a lot of things. There are a lot of factors that come into play, right? Because sometimes people think about it this way, that there is a lot more, as you said, there is a lot of venture capital in London, but also there is a lot more in the United States. and the deals that people get with their startups are much better. I just saw a post on LinkedIn today, I think, talking about some accelerator in London that endorsed, I think, just over £1 million in 11 startups in total, or something like this. And the argument was that this is not enough for a startup to reach Series A valuation, or anything like that. So the numbers can be very different from between the countries. So you talk about being in the center of the world and being able to travel, being closer to family, and all of the other factors. But if we take just a hardcore look at the numbers, and in terms of just growing the business and getting money and getting investments, would you say that the UK is competitive compared to the United States? Or would you say that for somebody who doesn't have those considerations that you mentioned, for whom it just matters to get the best deal for the startup to grow it as quickly as possible, would you say that the UK is a better option, or would you still advise people to go to the States?
I think this is a very complex question, and a couple of important considerations for everyone who is considering this. One, if you are starting a company in fintech, I think UK is bar none the best place to be, right? So, fintech, in fact, I would go to health tech and biotech as well, because I've seen the ecosystem a lot more richer, a lot more focused, a lot more expert in UK as compared to in the US, especially Silicon Valley. So that is no brainer. Forget about all of the considerations. That's the best. However, if you are in other areas of tech, I think it's still ways to go before UK becomes the best talent hub. And I think that's why they started this Tech Nation visa opportunity to make sure that people who are motivated with not just that, but other reasons as well, want to create their next home in UK and can build that talent pool, not just by being themselves there, but creating those companies, starting those businesses, and partly taking that risk. It's almost like a startup economy in a way, right? Like you are taking a risk by starting a company, but at the same time, being in the UK is a little bit of a risk that you won't get the best access to venture capital, partly, or you won't get the best access to talent in areas outside of fintech and biotech, but still you will have the opportunity to retain that talent a lot longer. I think the competition is lower, which is sometimes good for a startup. Because if you go to Silicon Valley and try to hire a team there, it is unlikely that you'll be able to retain most of them for more than a couple of years, because there is just so much going on. And I think that's something interesting. Also, the technical talent, not just in UK, but outside of UK in similar time zones in Europe, is equally good, like in any place like Silicon Valley too. So
Yeah.
that is an opportunity that is mostly untapped by companies
Mm.
outside of UK. Yeah.
That's interesting. So it's much more multidimensional than just how big of a deal you can get on your startup from a VC. Then there are a lot of things that come into play. So that's interesting. I think this can give people something to think about. And also, if you're watching this in the recording or live, make sure to ask questions, and we'll try to get them answered live or in the comments later. But I think it's an interesting way to hear a perspective of somebody who has experience with both the States and the UK. The fact that you mentioned both talents, I think, is interesting. You can get access to much cheaper talent if you are based closer to Europe, and also competition. I think that's also interesting to think about. So the thing that you mentioned about the Tech Nation visa being a way to attract talent, I think, is also an excellent point. I think that this visa, the UK Global Talent Visa, and we're specifically talking about the Tech Nation endorsement, which is the endorsement for the IT professionals, is one of the best and kind of one of the most competitive visas out there, just because of all the opportunities it gives you. You are not tied to your employer. You can start your own business without any permissions. You can study. You can take a break from work. You can be self-employed or work for somebody. So basically, the opportunities are endless. And I think this is something that the United States is severely lacking. So was the immigration topic also kind of a part of your decision to move to the UK versus staying in the United States? Or what was your perspective in general on the immigration to the United States?
I think this is something that is very emotional for me, because I had been in the US for about 14 years by the time I made the decision to
Wow.
move to UK. However, my permanent residency wasn't still sorted out, and I was a skilled immigrant. I was following all the channels that were legal and had the right level of endorsement and support from my employers. Yet it became still a major challenge to continue seeing US as a future home for me, right?
Mm.
So I think this particularly affects Indian born immigrants. So if you're not from India, maybe there's a different experience. Your mileage may vary. And especially, I think Chinese, Mexican, Brazilian, they are also affected in the same way. In fact, this is all public information. You can go to like green card queues and on USCIS website, you can see which country born immigrants are basically going to have this green card, which is equivalent of ILR here in the UK, in 20 years, maybe 30 years, because the queue they are processing is 10 years old, 15 years old at times. They just have a quota of a number of immigrants they will
Mm.
process every year from a single country, and they don't want
Yeah.
to go beyond that. So I think the immigration system is so complex in the US that I didn't want to deal with the same kind of problem ever again if I were to move outside of it, because I was really tired of it. And there are weird restrictions that come to mind, like every time you have to change employers, you have to make sure your new employers will support not just your visa, but also your permanent residency application, which can cost up to $20,000 just to get you
Wow.
as an employee, right? So, as an executive, even if I think about hiring immigrants now in the US, that's a big order. Like, I don't want to easily do that. That means, as an employee, you cannot easily work for a startup. As an employer who is a startup, cannot easily hire in the US. In fact, this is something that is going to be death by a thousand blows for the startup economy in the US. And I think the smart people are already starting to figure out alternatives, be it Canada, be it UK, where they can sustainably start and create longevity for their companies, where talent hiring is not a challenge dependent on the immigration system.
Yeah, yeah, it is brutal. So I think on this channel, we all like to complain about the UK skilled worker visa because a lot of my clients and me myself, we went through this visa and we like to complain about how restrictive it is. And, it was for me. But honestly, like even the skilled worker visa, it gives you a clear path to the ERL, right? Right. So you will get the permanent residency in 5 years, and then you can apply for the British passport in some time. But it's clear, like that you will get there as long as you have a job for 5 years, which again in this economy is a challenge. And a lot of people now are getting laid off, and the question is, what do I do? I have 60 days to leave. I know in the United States, I think it's also brutal. I don't know if it's more brutal or less, but on LinkedIn, I've been seeing a lot of messages from immigrants, and there are thousands of immigrants affected by this in the United States as well, by the layoffs and the fact that they have to leave the country. And it's just heartbreaking for me to read about those things, because I always imagine myself in the situation where I would have a family in the States, and I don't know, a mortgage and a lot of stuff, and then just being uprooted and having to leave super quickly. I think it's terrible, and I think taking care of your immigration is a really good investment in your future, even if it does feel like a drag and it feels like such a big investment, right? Because people ask me, even with the global talent visa, which is quite affordable if you compare it to the American options, the O1 visa or other visas, it's still a lot of money if you consider paying for 5 years of NHS upfront. Or five for 3 years. It's a lot of money because it's more than £600 a year, and you have to pay for each family member. So it adds up, but still, it's quite affordable compared to other options. And I think it's a good investment for your future if you're considering staying in the UK for, and getting some kind of second residency, which I think is a good investment in any times, but I think in these times especially. So so you made a decision to come to the UK, and you immediately went to the global talent visa, right? You didn't go through a skilled worker.
No, I was very clear about this that I don't want any ties to an employer.
Yeah.
I don't want any restrictions with my visa. And look, the economy is unpredictable. If there is a layoff that potentially happens, I don't want to be in a situation where my residency in the country is, under threat because of that reason,
Mm.
right? I mean, in fact, like my wife and I talk about this a lot, right? In the last, 12 months or so, what has happened in tech in Silicon Valley, right? we could have very easily been a victim of one of the layoffs, right? And it
Oh
could have
yeah.
stressed us out indefinitely, you know, because we really did, think about that as our home. Moving back to India, or taking an emergency situation decision is never easy or fun. So, like, we are way more like at ease here with this visa, which
Mm.
kind of protects you from these kind of actions, right? It's really based on your talent, you have the visa, and not because of your employer, right? So that makes a lot of difference in your mindset as well, because I feel a lot free in my decision
Mm.
making on a day-to-day basis, because I'm not like under this potential threat of getting in a situation where I would have to leave the country, right? So
Yeah.
uh, that really frees you up, mentally, and
Mm-hmm.
who knows what kind of potential comes up, in your head because of
Oh
that
yeah.
even. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I would say my life completely transformed once I switched to the talent visa, and I didn't even realize how much of a burden being a skilled worker was for me personally. So I think that when I was thinking about moving to the UK, I didn't worry about it too much, and I think most people don't because it's like this idea I'm moving to London, right? And if there is an employer who can help me do that, because also the employer pays for a visa and pays for all of your stuff and your location, and like helps with your department. So it's really nice, and you think that this is what matters. And at first, it's very important and it's appreciated. But then when the time goes on, and you're like, okay, so probably I'm staying here at least for some time. So what are my options? What am I gonna do? And I think at some point, if freedom is important to you, I think then you will come up against this problem. And also I think it's not a problem for everybody from what I heard. Like I talked to some people and I'm like, okay, there are layoffs and there will be more layoffs most probably. So what are you thinking about getting the visa? And people are thinking about the costs, and the costs are prohibitive, and they're like, okay, I'll just stay on this visa. And this amazes me to no end because we've already been through layoffs so many times with all of my clients as well. And yeah, I think that it's just, I don't know. I think it's like everybody has their different perceptions of risk tolerance and like what will happen. Some people are very optimistic about the economy, that this is the last layoff. For some reason they believe it. But yeah, as for my clients, I think a lot of them are. I'm glad that people are taking the decision to do this before anything bad happens. But also sometimes people reach out to me and saying, I've been laid off and I have 60 days to apply and get the visa. And honestly, 60 days is very little to get like the application ready, to get endorsed, to get the visa. So it takes a while. So if you're listening to this and you're on the fence, just reach out to me, go to my YouTube channel, do your own research, and just think of whether this would make sense for you, how important your life in the UK is for you, basically how important freedom of peace of mind is. And as Nipun said, it's hard to measure like what is the opportunity cost of not having the visa and then worrying about your legal status so much, because it does take a toll of you, right? So you not only have to do your job and do all the stuff that everybody else does, but also you have to worry about the visa, which locals don't have to. So you are not on the same playing field with them. So for you, it was important to get the visa from the get-go, which I understand, and I think it's really clever planning for your future, kind of knowing what you want and just going for it immediately. So what was the process for you? How did you learn about the visa? How did you start preparing the documents? And yeah, anything that you could share about the origin story of your visa and how you started.
Yeah, I mean, I have Google search to thank partly for this, because when I
Mm.
started looking at countries that had skilled immigration opportunities, UK came on top. There were others like Denmark, Netherlands in Europe, and I think Dubai, UAE, I guess, and Singapore. There were other options that we looked at, right? But like for some of the reasons, UK fit us best, and then once I went to the Home Office website, I could easily understand like the Tech Nation visa. And Tech Nation, like their own endorsing body, has this amazing website, which first it like seemed too good to be real. Like I thought this is some kind of a scam, right? Where you could just get endorsed so quickly and get permanent residency in 3 years if you're exceptional talent. I just couldn't believe it. So I did some inquiries, I researched online more and more and more, just to realize that, hey, this is actually true. It's just not very well marketed, which is kind of good and bad, right? Like good because there's less people who know about it and who know, like, can really capitalize on it quickly, and who don't know, it's kind of bad for them because there's so many people who benefit from this potentially, right? So I mean, I was really excited when I saw this, because this kind of was like best of both worlds. Like, you get a chance to live in a country like UK, and then you also, forget all the worries that, the immigration challenges that you've dealt with, and I had dealt with a lot at that point.
Yeah, definitely. I like how you said that you thought that it was a scam. It was too good to be true, because I think also a lot of people who are already in the UK, they go to the technician visa guide, which is the single source of truth for everything related to the visa. And this is the place that you should always double check, because the guide changes a lot. So anything that you hear online or see online, you should always double check that it still matches the guide. So yeah, I think that it does seem amazing once you realize how good the visa is, and also the fact that not many countries in Europe offer opportunities like this. For, there is a talent passport in France, there is the global talent visa in, Australia, but if you look at European countries, there are really no, maybe, correct me if there is something like this, but it's hard to find a place where, you can get access to such a visa and also move there. And I also, like, honestly, I think that a lot of people that I talk to, they would probably move somewhere else if there was a visa like this, but there isn't. So I think that's kind of an advantage that UK is benefiting from right now. After Brexit, the immigration became so much more open, which again kind of goes against what people think of Brexit and what it did to immigration. But it is an opportunity. It's a kind of a window of opportunity to move to the UK if you're interested. So don't think that this is still like a closed country. I think it's very much open to immigrants and creates really great opportunities for immigrants. So for you, since you applied as a business candidate, and there is still, I think, a lack of information for business candidates. There is a lot of information for software engineers, and I have done my part in it as well. I've interviewed a lot of engineers from Facebook and other companies on this channel. But this is not a visa for just programmers, right? So this is a visa for people working in IT, and this can be business professionals and also tech professionals. So in your case, as a business candidate, maybe you could talk to us about the criteria that you chose, if you still remember them, which kind of documents you used, and then we can unpack them in detail if something catches my attention. And also, if people have questions, you can post them and we can go into more detail.
Yeah. So it's been a long time, but I will try to recall. I think for business, it's still important to have had experience in a digital technology company, or in that ecosystem that allows you to really contribute towards UK economy, right? So this is something that was interesting for me to learn, because luckily I had been doing that not just in my day job but outside of my day job as well. A lot of people don't, you know, value their outside of day job experience, especially as business execs. We all get a chance to be advisors, investors in so many different companies that we can, impact, not just full time but part time as well. So I was, once I started to understand this criteria, I was very quick to shortlist the people who would be really helpful in endorsing me. And the endorsement goes really deep, right? Like, you cannot just get a letter of recommendation and say, like, like a university application. You have to be very clear about how this endorsement could contribute to UK's global talent pool and economy, and how the business experience that you had specifically will benefit UK. And I think that part is hard for a lot of candidates to understand, because it's very hard to say, like, oh, you'd contribute to a country's potential talent opportunity pool, business economy. So once I understood that, I think the game plan became clearer, and I was able to reach out to all these people in my network who would be helpful, be it other startup CEOs, founders, even venture capitalists, people who work directly with me in different capacities, and the ones who were faster to respond were the best endorsers. I think that's the easy way to think about it. And once I started like writing these down, all these endorsements, it was just a matter of getting an approval, review from them, and then finalizing these documents.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to prepare all the docs?
I had help from a consultant friend, and that shortened a lot of this time for me. But I think even then, like you have to be so disciplined because look, in
Hmm.
sitting in the US, you're not uncomfortable, and
Yeah.
you're already having an immigration status. There is no challenge, nothing. So I had to really motivate me. My wife had to motivate me. My friend had to motivate me. But with all that being said, we had calendar deadlines, right? We boxed the process in 28 days, and if we weren't able
Hmm.
to complete that, it was going to take forever. I knew that. We all knew that. So, we had to do end to end all the documents prep within 28 days, and then after that, review and finalize whichever's made sense, right? So, um,
Hmm.
I think if you drag it out much longer, it's a risk of potentially losing some things. And also, technician, you know this better than me, Nadia, that technician changes
Oh
their
yeah.
like criteria all the time. So working with what is known and preparing an
Oh
application
yes.
around it, you can't take too long, right? Because if the criteria changes in the middle of all your prep, then you have to redo it again. So I was very clear about that as well. So I didn't want to delay it, and that's why calendar helped.
That's so smart. I think that people do drag those things out, and I think also like obviously I run a business coaching people, but also I try to push the notion that you don't really need a coach or a lawyer to do this. You can do it on your own. But also if you want to save, money and do it on your own, just be prepared to put in time and also have a deadline, as you said, like have an idea of how long are you going to spend on this, because what people don't realize is that there is a lot of work that goes into making a successful application, a lot of writing, a lot of gathering information, a lot of just trying to come up with like experts to support you and all of that stuff, figuring out the criteria and like all of this stuff. So just make sure that you budget in for time if you're trying to save money. If you're not trying to save money, find somebody who you trust and who can get the stuff done quickly. I think the time is very important. As you said, the rules change. They change sort of unpredictably, right? So if you're not working for a technician, you don't really know when the rules will change. And I'm not associated with the technician. So it's like the rules are published and then we react to them and we work off them. So I think having a coach helps in this respect because like I keep tabs on all the changes, but also if you're not doing it on your own, just make sure that you follow the rules. But the faster you do this, the bigger the chances that you can still get it done within the old rules. Because what happened in my experience is that the rules changed and we had to very quickly react and change the application with my client, which was quite stressful. But also, if you're working on your own, you can miss the update, right? You can apply thinking something else is true and then you get rejected because the rules change. So it's a really good point about you saying that the benefits of having help to get things done quicker. But also, I think that there's quite a lot of information online, and Emmanuel actually quite kindly shared my website. Thanks so much. So on my website, there is a section called Do It Yourself, which has information like all the free and cheap resources to get prepared for the application. So you can check them out as well. If you're interested, also, of course, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn if you need any help. So just DM me, admin. So in your case, you said it took you a month to prepare, which I would say that is quite fast because I've had people prepare for 6 months. Some people prepare for much longer. But again, it's kind of a process that it's never ending, right? It's like you're improving your documents, then the rules change, then you get something else, then I don't know, your expert that was going to support you, they disappear. And it's like a process that can drag on forever. So in terms of your criteria, do you still remember the ones that you chose? So there are 4 optional, right? So maybe you remember, at least one that you chose. Did you go for the innovation or the outside of your work contributions? Do you still remember?
I think I am not able to remember. If you remind me, maybe I can, you know, choose the ones that made more sense. Because I did
Yeah.
some outside of the work, for sure. Because I had some companies I was advising, their founders
Mm.
wrote an endorsement for me, and then also uh, like within work, because I was the head of security innovation at Deutsche Bank. So that, of course, was the criteria that I tried to
Yeah.
match. Yeah,
Yeah. Innovation is a criteria. And you applied for talent, right? Or for promise?
for talent. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
too old for promise.
Yeah, also, just to be clear, you technically you I don't know if you can be too overwhelmed, but it just means that you need to spend fewer than 5 years in the tech industry. So if you're like an older career changer, you can still get the promise route if you explain that you changed your jobs, and it has to be very clear from your experience that, if you're like over 30, for instance, if you're applying for promise, you need to explain why. And also, like, a lot of people get endorsed for promise even if they're older. So you said innovation, you said things that you did outside of work. Could you maybe expand on the advising that you've done for startups? Because this is something that people do and they have questions about, like, I don't know, how many startups should you advise? And like, what kind of proof do you submit to show that you have advised startups?
Yeah. Well, as a professional who works a full-time job, you cannot have unlimited bandwidth. So I generally recommend advising no more than two startups, because if you're going to put in a lot of time, and I would assume you'd put in roughly 2 to 3 hours a month in advising a startup, that would mean you can't do too much outside of two or three startups at most. So I was advising two companies at that time. What was interesting about my advice is, for one of them, it was very go to market focused, because I understood the market forces very well in cybersecurity. And for another one, it was more around product strategy. And one of them was a fintech, one of them was a cybersecurity startup. So what was good is I built very strong relationship with the founder. So they really knew the extent of my contribution, and they were the decision maker in putting me in that advisory role. So that relationship generally helped me for like advising them well as when it came to getting the Technation endorsement, it was like not even a question for them. Like, when it was just like, just tell me how to do it and I'll do it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that is what I would advise. So wherever you advise a company, I know there's some different ways of doing that. I would suggest building the relationship with the founders, the CEO, at the very least, right? So you can leverage that if you need to, in an understanding the market very well, or if something like this technician comes up, they can wholeheartedly endorse you. And I mean, really spend the time in understanding what they do, and tell them what you think from your experience is relevant for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this makes sense. So this was part of the evidence. I'm just trying to, I don't know, help you remember what else did you use. So for the visa, like a lot of typical applicants, they would use things that they have done outside of work, like mentoring, volunteering, helping people, teaching people something. And then there are also things that I can group under the category of an external profile. So things that we can find about you in the media, online or offline, just kind of the general name recognition and you being known as an expert in tech. And this is, again, something that people really worry about. So what was your kind of external profile when you were
Yeah.
applying?
Yeah, that's a good question. I got lucky because I had always been very proactive in building my brand. So uh, I used to have a podcast, and that podcast was picked up by a few journalists, right? So that really helped. In the meantime, I was guests on many podcasts. I was on many panels that were recorded, virtually or in person as well. So I think that created a generally a good opportunity for me to say that it's easy for you to find me, what I do, and how I've contributed. But I also went after certifications that were in my field, right? So I would often like say, okay, you know what, in cybersecurity, in order to be an expert in this specific subsector, I need to get the certification. So I would go study, give an exam, and get that, right? So all those proofs were really important to kind of make it clear to technician endorsing body that I knew what I was talking about, and my colleagues are not lying. All these certifications are, proof of my understanding and specialization in the field that I was in.
Hmm.
Yeah,
What year was it when you applied?
it was 2020.
So I think that back then, and I might be wrong, I think there was this criteria related to certifications and continuous
Correct.
learning, yeah, that you
Yes.
could use to prove that you are expanding your skills. And this has been taken out since then. So,
Okay.
yeah. So if you're watching this in 2023, unless they bring it back at some point, but to make sure that right now it's not there. So things like certificates and completing exams, people usually use them on their CV if there is space, but for the purposes of being endorsed right now, it doesn't add that much value, unfortunately. But the things that you mentioned about your external profile, they are still super important, and I think that they're even more important than ever, because from the rejections that I see on Telegram chats and on forums, and this is where I spend a lot of my time just seeing like what is happening right now with technician. The rules haven't really changed, but I think that the general sentiment changed a little bit, because there is the letter of the law, so to say, and there is the spirit of the guide. And the guide doesn't say that it's required that you have this personal brand that you said you had, like media appearance and things like that. But still, I think in the past it was possible. It was quite possible to get the visa without almost any public profile. And again, this is kind of an little known, I don't know, secret or not secret, but I think a lot of some people who are helping others get endorsed for this visa, some companies, they're kind of promoting this idea that in the past you had to have some publications, you had to have some media appearances, and it was actually like it helps, but also it wasn't really that much of a requirement. You could still get endorsed if you had like a really strong work profile, so you have done amazing innovations, or something with startups that was really significant, you could get endorsed. But lately I've been seeing that some rejections were mentioning things like, we would expect a global talent visa recipient to have a public profile, we would expect them to have some sort of name recognition or public speaking or awards or something external. So I do think that the importance of this stuff is rising. And again, this is kind of my subjective feeling, but I would say that if you have those things, I would make sure to use them. If you don't have the public profile, if you don't have a podcast like Nipun did, or like interviews and things like that, I would say that I wouldn't advise you to spend the next month just frantically trying to create all of this stuff out of thin air, because it doesn't really work anymore. So Technician mentions in their rejections right now that all of the things are clustered within a very short period of time, which makes us believe that they were done to support the timing of the application, right? So just be aware of this and make sure that you are doing things that are reasonable, they don't waste your time, but also that kind of add to your application, right? So I think in your case, you said that you were lucky to have a public profile, but I also, as somebody who has built a profile for myself, I know that it's not about luck, it's more about a lot of hard work, right? But yeah, I guess what you're saying, like it's useful to have something about yourself online when you apply for this visa. And it does help. I think that if you are planning for the future, for kind of long term, right, I would advise people to build their personal brand. I think it helps in life and career, but also for this visa and for other visas like this, it's super important. So it's something to keep in mind. Is there something that you would advise to somebody who is maybe listening to this and thinking of moving to the UK on a visa, on a global talent visa, but not right now, maybe, I don't know, a year from now, right? So what would you advise somebody like this with a business background, that they have time to make some decisions about their career, what they do in their free time? Is there something that you think will be beneficial?
Yeah, I think somebody in business definitely has a knack for understanding the market, the strategy. So for them, advising companies, mentoring founders, mentoring other people in business would be a great way to contribute uh, to their ecosystem, but also build some of those relationships that could turn into endorsements in the future. And I think strong endorsements from people like that is exactly what Technation is looking for, because then they would really see that you are the kind of person who would have that effect, that impact that they're looking for this talent pipeline to build.
Exactly. I think one thing to remember is that Technician, they don't have a way to independently verify whether you are a global talent or not, right? The person who's reading your application, they're not like an expert in your specific field, and they don't really know whether you're an expert either. So what it matters is that they see somebody else saying that you're an expert, and this somebody should be an expert themselves with some sort of profile, career. And if they are saying that you are a global talent, then it adds points to your application. So letters of recommendation are super, super important. So I would agree. I think that working on your network is something that can help you massively on top of working on your public persona and public profile. But I think those things kind of go hand in hand. So once you grow your public brand, you will also meet a lot of people, you will cooperate with them, kind of being open to opportunities, I would say. I had one guest on this channel saying that you need to do something interesting. And I still remember this quote from an earlier podcast that to get endorsed, you need to do something interesting with your work, with your life. And it's a great tip for generally for the future, for your life. But for this visa, it's super important to have something else to say outside of, I was paid to do, to code apps, and I coded apps for 5 years. And I think that's not enough to be endorsed for this visa. So this is great. And for the letters of recommendation that you mentioned, maybe you could talk to us a bit about who were the people who supported you with these letters? Who were the experts, right? Who were supporting you with their recommendation letters? We don't need names, obviously, but just kind of the caliber of people who supported you.
Yeah, good question. So, if I recall correctly, one of them was a C-level person at the Deutsche Bank. So that helped a lot. And they were also a UK resident. I don't know if that necessarily matters, but somebody who is C-level, who I worked, hand in hand with whenever I got the opportunity, really considered, my advice, my contribution to the company valuable. And for them to take some time to write speaks volumes about your strengths, right? As a contributor, as somebody who understands market, business, technology, all this, right? So I think that was really, I would say, the heaviest in terms of letter recommendations. And then there was a partner at Deloitte who I
Mhm.
worked with when I was at Deloitte in consulting. Somebody who owns a multi-billion-dollar company, a part of it, can talk about some your business skills. Again, a great recommendation. Um, I'm trying to remember who else. Uh, Remind me, like, who could write letter recommendations
So
beyond your
yeah,
managers and
yeah.
colleagues?
So it has to, yeah. So like they currently it's a requirement that the letters are not coming from your colleagues and managers, so they have to be somebody a little bit removed from you. But also the
Right.
rules change. With that, the rules changed quite a lot from 2020. Right now, you have to have somebody who is an established leader in digital tech,
Okay.
who is not your direct manager or your colleague, who is not your friend. And also there is a new requirement, like relatively new requirement of the 12 months. So they have to have awareness of your work for at least 12 months, which was
Right.
quite a strict addition to the rules, and it wasn't there before. But I think that generally, like, what helps is just knowing like what kind of people are those, and how maybe you could talk about like how difficult was it to get people like this to support you, or was it easy?
I don't want to say it's easy because firstly you have to explain why you want
Yeah.
this, right?
How do
And
you explain? How do you explain?
yeah, that's challenging, right? Like, firstly, you're like, well, if somebody asked, "Is this for a business school application?" I was like, "No, no, no, this is not." And then somebody would ask, uh, "Well, I'm not sure. I have to check with my lawyer because this sounds like something that my company has to approve before my name and my position, my logo, letterhead, all that goes in there. And I think that's sometimes a hurdle for people in that role, because they are subject to so many regulations, policies. So you have to be clear that that's an option, right? You don't have to put your letterhead. You don't have to, have your official stamp for everything. As long as you, as a person who has known my work, can give me that recommendation, we can work around these like things that create that perception that you are writing this officially from the company letterhead and all that, right? So I think that was something that we worked out creatively. But yeah, I mean, telling them that, look, this is a visa that recognizes the skills and the value that I can bring to UK. And this is the only way that I will ever get the visa. So your contribution to my career is an investment in our relationship. So something like that really resonated well for people who already created that idea in their head that we can work together, right? So once you know that you can work with some people who are already strong, I mean, you essentially need to kind of get this from your mentors, right? People who are not officially working with you, but still like you and believe that you can be that leader in the future. Um, they're really good options to pitch this to.
Yeah. I think people need to look kind of wider their network, and a lot of people just focus on the people they work with. And I think it's usually advisable to get at least some letters of support from your current company, but make sure that it's not from your direct manager. You can get a skip level manager or somebody higher, like a group manager or head of product or something like this. I think that's useful because they can talk about your projects at work, which I think can be a very strong addition if if this is applicable for the visa. So also, I would recommend that people get somebody from outside their work, especially now. I do see some rejections where people get rejected for just having letters from their place of work, especially if you work in the same company for 5 years, for instance, and the 5 years is where the application is focused for technician. So if you get all of the letters from your employer, I think that's really creates kind of a weak profile for a technician, because as you can imagine, they might ask, how come you're planning to be a global talent if like all of your letters are from your job, right? So this is where I usually try to challenge people to get letters from other places. Sometimes it's not possible, right? But you should realize that it's risky. So I would really, really strongly recommend that you look wider at your network and try to meet more people, try to do something with them. Some side projects actually help, I think, or like having some kind of side hustle, side business, or for software engineers, like open source project that you're doing with somebody, something that you're doing outside of your work with somebody who is established in the industry can be used. But again, if you don't have it, then it can be quite a challenge to get it right. But also I think for people just starting out in the industry, the letters are super important, because if you're applying for Promise, you don't really have that many achievements very often. You're just starting out in tech, but you have some kind of potential. So the letters can really speak about it strongly. So I think this matters as well. And yeah, what you mentioned even about the kind of complexity of getting the letter and like explaining why you need it, I think this is where a lot of people also struggle. I think it's not easy, and people feel very self-conscious about asking for this, for help like this. So I think that it really helps to explain why you need it. And I think even if you're asking for a letter from your current company, I think this is where people worry, because it's like, will I get fired? If they know that I'm switching visas. Here, I just wanted to clarify that if you're switching the visa from skilled worker to global talent, it doesn't affect your relationship with your employer. You can still work for the same employer, which I did with my job at Intercom. So I switched from the visa, but my contract wasn't affected by this, and yours shouldn't either. But I think you should explain, why you need this visa, and just put their mind at ease that you're not leaving them. That you're just doing it for the sake of getting the permanent residency faster, or you want to have this kind of stability and peace of mind, I think this really helps. But also I think people who are immigrants, they especially understand how important this is. And you can just explain that, hey, I want to settle in the UK. I just need this path to permanent residency. I can't do the sponsorship. It's too risky. It's too stressful. And people usually understand and they reach out and they help, but not always. Also, I really want to encourage people to have additional experts on board who can support you in case somebody else decides to drop out at the last moment, which happens. So a lot of things around that are, I think, quite helpful. So I thought that we could maybe look at the questions that we get and then kind of do some closing thoughts and maybe some thoughts of encouragement from you, or, lessons learned, or things like what I wish somebody told me before I applied for the visa. I think those are always useful. But first, let's look at the questions. And also, if you're watching this live, it's kind of your last opportunity to ask a question live, so make sure that you do. Okay, so there was one question from LinkedIn user. I don't know why it's anonymous, but how do I apply for a global talent visa as a marketing professional? I'm already in the UK, so I can just quickly answer it. So if you work in tech, you can apply for the visa as a marketing professional. It's a business skill that is accepted by Technician. Honestly, if you look at Technician visa guide, you would see a list of professions that are eligible. It's not an exhaustive list, right? So if you don't see your own job there, it doesn't mean that you can't apply. Very often you can. So how do you apply? Basically the regular process. If you have specific questions, I'd be happy to help you. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, just add me. But also on my channel, I interviewed already a couple of people who work in marketing. So if you go to the channel and you look for marketing in the title of the interview, you would see a couple of interviews with people who have done it. So you can watch them. There are links to get in touch with those people as well. So you can do your own research. You can look at their profiles on LinkedIn. So that's basically it. I don't know what to add here. And there was another question. What is the best suggestions to fulfill this criteria? Published material in professional or major trade publications related to the applicant's work. So maybe Nipun, you could share whether you had any publications that you used for the application.
To be honest with you, no. I don't think I had any publication. I mean, but this kind of is very personal, depends on your skill set and expertise. But I did have, something which is equally good, which is like giving talks and being on panels at some expert forums, right? So, which I think is exchangeable in this. So, yeah, major trade publications, professional publications. Yeah, that would be really good to see.
Yeah.
I think it's tangible. It's something that people can instantly recognize as the proof of your knowledge in that space.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not a requirement to have publications, but I think it's advisable to have something to your name. As you said, being invited as an expert on panels or talking at conferences or meetups, sharing your knowledge. These are all things that prove that you're an expert. And I think sometimes people miss the point of why you should have publications as well. And they're like, they see the word publication and they just go on, I don't know, HackerNoon and start writing 10 articles in a month. So, I mean, like, if you feel like it, just go ahead and do that. But also I think you should realize what's the point of this requirement, right? So what it says and also what it means. So what it means is that Technician wants to see people who are experts in their field and people who are opinion leaders, who are thought leaders in the space. And a very easy way to show that you're a thought leader is to actually see your thoughts published online or offline. If it's a print magazine, it works as well. So if you can prove that your words, your opinions on a topic that you're an expert in are published somewhere and people can read them. And I think it's really important if somebody actually reads those words. So you should provide stats and screenshots of some kind of stats related to how many people read your pieces or watched your interviews or attended your talks. These are all important. This shows that you are an expert, that you're recognized as a leader, and they're very good documents for the mandatory criteria, which is all about you being a leader, right? So this is, again, like people ask me, like, how do I show that I'm a recognized leader in tech? And it's very vague, right? What is a leader? Like, how do you define it? And I think publications help. But to your question specifically, like how to fulfill the criteria, it depends on your field. So maybe you can clarify what you do. But you should find publications that you would consider important for the industry. So, and you know best which are those for your specific specialty, right? So, if you're a front-end engineer, there would be publications that like everybody reads in front-end engineering, and like this is your kind of North Star where you should strive to have something published. But also you can start small. You can start publishing in some smaller scale blogs or online publications, and then building up your name. And then it's much easier to get published in the more serious publications, because then you can say, hey, see, I got published in a number of blogs like this, and I have this article for your publication, and hopefully you can get accepted there as well. So basically look for something established, something that people read with good readership statistics, something that looks serious. It doesn't have to be an academic publication by any means. It doesn't have to be like a scientific journal, unless you're going for the academic criteria, which is number 4 in the optional criteria. So then, of course, it's different. So I'm now talking about the mandatory criteria, just publications for general IT professionals. So, but yeah, this is the general answer. If you want kind of more personalized help for your specific situation, you can reach out to me and I'll be happy to advise you on your specific case, because again, this is all very different from industry to industry. And so the answer is, as always in software engineering, it depends, but that's kind of the general way to think about it. And also, again, on my channel, I interviewed so many people already. You can look at what they used, and I think that a lot of them used actually their personal blogs, where the blogs were popular, right? So if nobody reads your blog, then it's not such a good indication of you being a thought leader, because usually if you're a thought leader, people follow your thoughts. So this is one thing. And then like getting published somewhere, I just remembered like the requirement is that this is something that is pre-moderated, right? So you can't just go and publish something like on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is not accepted, or Medium is not accepted. So make sure that there is some moderation that shows that your article was selected, right? So I guess we answered the question. So Richard, thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for watching and listening to this. Cool. Yeah, we don't have any more questions. If you have them later on, continue to ask them. I'll try to answer all of them. So just, closing thoughts, anything that you wish somebody told you before you started, any kind of thoughts or tips and tricks that you learned along the way, or just words of encouragement to people who are thinking about applying for this visa?
Yeah, I think like I wish I knew about this earlier, right? That's the only thing I would say. So if you are watching this, don't be lazy. Take action right now. I think it's such an amazing opportunity to be in an amazing country, a super diverse place for you to feel very comfortable in, and it is a world class place to be in, right? So you can build anything you want here, and you can really start to realize some of your dreams that may not have been because of the immigration challenges, no matter where
Yeah.
you are. And you do get access to all sorts of talent and capital and things that may not be there as equivalent to Silicon Valley, but I think they're certainly building towards it. One trick I would suggest when it comes to publications is writing newsletters. Having your own Substack is very easy and quick way of gathering your thoughts and publishing and building that audience quickly and easily. In fact, one of my friends is a serial newsletter writer, and he recently got the technician visa, and that was his, I would say, best publication skill that got recognized by technician as well. But again, I think that's something that it's not obvious to a lot of people. So that would be
newsletters. Actually, a great idea. Like I don't think anybody advised about that on my channel. Yeah. And it kind of reminds me that I should bring back to life my old newsletter about books that I kind of that I let a little bit die over time. But yeah, it's great. I think that building an audience through a newsletter is really good for all kinds of reasons, because this is, again, the only audience that you truly own, unlike all of the social media where kind of Google owns your audience basically, or LinkedIn. But yeah, newsletter, you own your you own your audience, you have their contact details, and you can reach out to them. And I think here it's very easy to build like really good relationships with the audience, and it's also easy to, I think, become like a leader in the like a niche space, right? So if you have like a small newsletter that is super niche, focused on one specific area of business or tech, then it's easier to explain why even 500 subscribers on your newsletter is significant. And if you have, I don't know, Twitter account, right, and you have 500 people, it's kind of like nothing at this point. So I think it's really good advice. Let me ask you this final question, or I don't know, maybe hopefully final. We don't have a time limit, but we'll wrap up now. So so you've been an immigrant in the United States, and now you're an immigrant in the UK. What has your experience been as an immigrant in those two countries? Would you say that anyone is better for being an immigrant, or more friendly, or would you say that both countries are equally open and just comfortable to be an immigrant?
I think it's a very personal question again. My opinion is my opinion. It
Yeah, of
could be
course.
very different for you. This disclaimer said, I believe UK is a safer place to be, because especially due to gun laws. And I don't believe that's something that's easy for people to understand unless they live and are able to appreciate the challenges that come with the loose gun laws in the US, right? So that was one of the biggest drivers outside of everything else that made us take this action and make the move over to the UK. With that being said, there is no better place for business than US. UK is
Mm-hmm.
certainly, one of the oldest places to do business. So they do understand what you're building. There is a lot of excitement and opportunity here, and it's getting to the point where it's really amazing uh, to be a founder, to be a startup entrepreneur, to be a business person in the US, in the UK, sorry. So
Mm.
I think, but now is the time, right? Like, who knows, 10 years later, this is really incredible. And it's same as being in Silicon Valley, right? Where you're one amongst millions building the same things that everybody else is, right? So
Yeah.
this is the time to differentiate yourself and come to the UK. What One last thing I would say is, think about like where you see yourself, in the next 5 years. Common question, but if you like the atmosphere that UK provides, the weather that comes with it, all right. Everybody British loves to talk about the weather because it's so interesting and unpredictable. But at the same time, there's a lot of opportunity that is untapped here. So um, I would say personally, I would take UK any day over US.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I would say that the UK is. I haven't lived in the States, but I've lived in Poland, for instance, and I would say that as a more diverse place, UK is definitely, at least London, is definitely a much more. It's just an easier place to be an immigrant, which I
Yeah.
think not everybody realizes. It's kind of like if there are a lot of immigrants, if it's a huge city, you feel more welcome in a way. You're more anonymous, but also I felt much more at home, much quicker, and I kind of felt less lonely and less homesick. Even though Poland is right next to Belarus, where I'm from, it's still, I think, in London, it kind of you feel connected because there are a lot of people from your background speaking the same language. You can find all the shops, all the food. Like it's so easy, and you just feel that you can arrange your life much easier than in other countries which have fewer immigrants, or at least had fewer immigrants when I was there. So that's interesting to hear. And the point that you made about competition, that it's not as intense in the UK, I think it's also valuable. And the weather, I don't know. I think like London is freakishly warm. It surprised me how warm it is in winter. I think people don't understand that there are palm trees and the flowers bloom all throughout the year, and like spring starts in end of January, which is very weird, and the grass is green. So it's the weather. I think it depends on where you're coming from, right? So like I grew up on the border of Belarus and Russia, so for me it's like really nice weather in London, but your mileage may vary depending on where you're from. So just be aware of it. Yeah, we just talked about the weather, so which is, I think, kind of
Very
short
British.
for yeah, very British way to close this down. But yeah, thank you so much, Nipun, for your time, sharing your perspective. It was super valuable. And thanks to everybody who tuned in. Again, if you're watching this as a recording, make sure to subscribe to show support. This will help others learn about this visa as well. As we discussed, I think almost with every guest, the visa is still not very well known around the world. A lot of people never heard of it. A lot of people heard of it, but they think it's only for programmers. So I want to set the record straight and get this out to as many people as possible. So everybody's support is super appreciated. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much, Nipun, for your time.
Thank you, Nadia, for having me. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and I wish everybody a nice weekend ahead. Bye.
Bye.